Hi, and welcome back to the Pastor's Study, where we are committed to helping you get to know your Bible better. Today we will be continuing our series on the genealogy of Christ in the Gospel according to Matthew, and before you hit pause or turn to another video, I get it. I get that genealogy is not the most exciting thing in the world to everybody, but if we learn a little bit about our family of origin, we learn a little bit about ourselves. We can find patterns of behavior, we can find gifts and talents, we can find ways of looking at the world that are unique to a particular family or tradition. And as members or parts of that family or tradition, we too carry on that unique way of seeing and understanding the world. We have a shared story and a shared experience. In Jesus' genealogy in the Gospel according to Matthew, the author gives us Joseph's family history. And Joseph, being Jesus' stepfather, is part of Christ's family of origin. So it's important to understand where the different traits and behaviors that we find present in Jesus have their roots. Maybe if we come to a better understanding of that, we too, as part of God's extended family, can come to understand our place and our way in the world a little bit better. Now, for those of you who are not fans of sitting through all of the credits at the end of the movie, I'm not going to reread the genealogy in its entirety, but I'd like you to turn your attention for a moment to Matthew chapter 1, verse 6. Actually, I'm going to start back at verse 5. Because one of the interesting things about this genealogy is its focus on a few women in particular and what they tell us about Jesus' family of origin, God's plan of salvation for the world, and how we as Christians, as part of God's extended family, are to be in the world as well. Last week we took a look at Rahab, mentioned in Joshua 2. Here we're going to take a look at Jesus' great-grandmother, I think. Don't quote me. But we're going to be taking a look at Ruth. We're told in Matthew chapter 1, in the second part of verse 5, that Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Ruth is one of few women in the Bible to have an entire book named after her. You've got Ruth, you've got Esther, and really that's it. And Ruth is a particularly meaningful book for me. You see, when my wife and I got married, she surprised me with this wonderful ring. And the inscription on this ring in Hebrew is taken from the book of Ruth. It reads, "Where you go, I will follow." This is part of Ruth's promise to her mother-in-law, Naomi, after the death of her husband and her sister-in-law's husband. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. In Ruth Chapter 1, we read, "During the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. A man and his wife and 2 sons went from Bethlehem of Judah to dwell in the territory of Moab. The name of that man was Elimelech. The name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the territory of Moab and settled there. But Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. The only thing she was left along with her 2 sons. Then only she was left along with her 2 sons. They took wives for themselves, Moabite women. The name of the first was Orpah, and the name of the second was Ruth. And they lived there for about 10 years. But both of the sons, Mahlon and Chilion, also died. Only the woman was left without her 2 children, without her husband. Then she arose along with her daughters-in-law to return from the fields of Moab, because while in the territory of Moab, she had heard that the Lord had paid attention to his people by providing food for them. She left the place where she had been, and her 2 daughters-in-law went with her. They went along the road to return to the land of Judah. Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, 'Go, turn back each of you to your household and to the household of your mother. May the Lord deal faithfully with you, just as you have done with the dead and with me. May the Lord provide for you so that you may find security, each woman in the household of her husband.' Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. But they replied to her, 'No. Instead, we will return with you to your people. Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why would you go with me? Will there again be sons in my womb, that they would be husbands for you? Turn back, my daughters. Go. I am too old for a husband. If I were to say that I have hope, even if I had a husband tonight, and even more if I were to bear sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you refrain from having a husband? No. My daughters, this is more bitter for me than for you, since the Lord's will has come out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth stayed with her. Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law is returning to her people and to her gods. Turn back after your sister-in-law." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to abandon you, to turn back from following after you. Wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do this to me, and even more so, if even death separates me from you." When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her about it. And they both went along and arrived at Bethlehem. Now, Naomi did something that many people do when they're faced with tragedy in their life. It's a very natural human thing. She looked for a reason to explain it. She'd lost her husband. She'd lost her sons. She lived in a land of famine, and she did not see hope for herself in the future. And so she tells her daughter-in-law to leave because she believes she's been cursed by God. As a pastor, I've run into time and time again where Christians think that God has turned his back on them, where they think that God's abandoned them or God has allowed something evil to happen to them. My brothers and sisters, that's simply not the nature of our gracious God. Grace is when we get things we don't deserve. Mercy is when we don't get what we have coming to us. And those two attributes, grace and mercy, more than any other, let us know about our God and about the family that we find ourselves a part of, because as we read to the end of the book of Ruth, we find that rather than abandoning Naomi, God was looking out for her, and that the vehicle that God chose to supply her needs was Ruth, her daughter-in-law, and Boaz, Ruth's new husband. As we continue to read in the story, we see Ruth, a beggar woman with nowhere else to turn, a stranger, an alien, and a foreigner in a foreign land, went out gleaning bits of the harvest on the lands of Boaz, one of her extended family. After the workers would gather up the crops, she would come behind to eat and to gather what was left and to bring it back to her mother-in-law. She's a woman who lived as an alien in this land, who lived off of begging and scrounging and gathering together what she could. I find it amazing that we as Christians, particularly as Christians in the U.S., have so stigmatized caring for the foreigner in our midst, taking care of the homeless and the indigent, looking out for people who need a hand up and a little bit of help to get back on their own feet. We hear time and time again this message that we need to learn to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. But friends, those of you who have worn boots with straps, you'll know this is an impossibility. It simply can't be done. We need others. We live in a society, in a world where we need to exercise mercy, love, and compassion every time we have the opportunity, particularly for those who are in need. We too often find ourselves in need, and I don't know about you, but I have never once pulled myself up by my own bootstraps. Time and time again, people have shown me kindness and mercy, gentleness and grace. Time and time again, I've received help from others. That's simply how life is. That's how we're to be as God's family. We are to act the way that Christ's family act, the way that his great, many times removed grandfather acted in showing kindness to those who are in need. And Ruth was sly as well. Ruth hatches a plan along with her mother-in-law Naomi to convince Boaz to marry her. And Boaz hatches a plan as well and enacts it to manage to become Ruth's kinsman redeemer, as the language went. Again, we see the machinations and the inner workings, the thinking of God's people. We have this idea that God works and behaves in a particular way, that when a thing's a miracle, it's a miracle because God did it out of the blue, nothing else attached. Friends, it doesn't work that way. As we look throughout history, we find the will of the divine being enacted through the ideas and plans of human beings just like you and me. It's through the clever thinking and scheming of Tamar that Christ's lineage was continued. It was through the work of Rahab hiding these foreign spies in her midst. It's through the work of Ruth and Naomi as they found a way to join Ruth and Boaz together that we find God's work and will being done in the world. It's through the action of Joseph taking Mary to be his wife, making the decision to stand by her, that we see this extended family of Christ provided that would shape our Messiah and would shape us as well as part of God's extended family. Let's take the lessons we have learned from this genealogy and look to apply them in our own life and world. At least it's my hope that we do that. Thank you for joining us today on the Pastor's Study. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Goodbye, and God bless.